I'm the chair for the Institute for Competitiveness, and I'm also the visiting scholar and lecturer at Stanford University. So it's absolutely an honor to really work on this. So what I really wanted to share was the whole effort that the government of India has actually done. Again, this was more from a documentation perspective to really understand what were the great things that have happened. And as Lavji had said, that it was an idea to understand how we can learn from the steps that we have taken to really see how we can tackle the future pandemics. It was an exceedingly important idea to really create a toolkit or an understanding. So this is the documentation effort. As we move along, we are going to be presenting a toolkit as well as we move forward. Then of course, as everybody knows, COVID was something that happened in 2020. It just took the world by storm. And the question was that how India was really tackling it. And there were some huge positives, as I see. Of course, every country had its challenges. India had its share of challenges. But I think there is something remarkable that has actually happened, and that was in terms of seeing how steps were taken. From my point of view, there was a very huge integration of and commitment from the top, which led to something very remarkable here. Of course, this was the chronology of the COVID emergence. It started very early on, but I think what really did happen was that the government of India started noticing all this in the early days of the onset of the virus. The first meeting, as I understand, happened as way back in December of 2020 to really see what was happening. So the response was very quick. The whole government system really started working towards that system. And then of course the top 5 nations that were facing the maximum outbreak were countries like, of course, US, then Italy was at the forefront, and so on and so forth. This data is there, but we really wanted to document this to understand what is happening. But here comes one of the most positive things. If you really look at all the vaccine coverage that has happened across the world, there are rotavirus is 35%, tuberculosis is 89%. But what matters here is that at the scale and speed at which adult vaccination for COVID-19 happened, this is a historical effort of sorts. Like India was really able to take it forward. There were some other countries which have tried to do this, but I think at the top of the heap, from my understanding, would be that India did a historical effort to really cover the number of people who have been covered until now. And of course, if you really look at the adult vaccination coverage, of course there were challenges for the government which they have really taken care of as we were really moving ahead. But one of the foremost things that I come to my mind was the development process for the vaccine. Typically, vaccine development cycle takes about 10 years. But what happened here was that how we were able to really crunch that into a very quick 1-year cycle, which included creating the manufacturing processes to really moving ahead. So what did happen was this was not something which was not embedded in science. It was deeply embedded in science and research, that you were able to do everything together. It was a process which was run parallelly, and that is where we see the story of vaccine development. Again, something very quickly, when COVID-19 vaccine development had to happen, it started, the first meeting happened in 2020 or early 2020 itself. And this shows a very preemptive move. In fact, India was one of the very few countries which was talking about vaccine development very early on during the onset of the disease. And if you really look at it, it was actually a movement or that was created wherein a lot of people were getting involved. It was not a single person effort. It was a multi-player, multi-stakeholder effort that we could see. Of course, DBT played a key role here. In fact, that is where Ministry and the Ministry of Health and DBT were working for creating the vaccine. And then there was a license that was granted. And a lot of players were there, but there were 2 very critical players that you do see that did emerge. One was, of course, Serum, that was Covishield, and then Bharat Biotech, which was Covaxin. That did happen out of this. And very important that India did align itself with the world. Because if you really look at the science and how things were happening, India did align itself to the world to really create that vaccine. There was a lot of knowledge transfer. If you really look at it, this was an effort which showcased India's scientific capability. Because a lot of people will always criticize that the R&D capacity for the country or whatever, but this is where India did show to the world that this is something huge, that we can actually talk about science and we can be at the forefront of how we really develop the solutions. And Covaxin is actually a reflection of that very, very clearly. And then, of course, the COVID vaccine development timeline, it was a rapid development process. I leave the slides for you, but I'll quickly move through all this information. But the most important here is that how this timeline was really looked at. From 11th March to 2022, where you get approvals, which was very, very quick. And there was no reason to really say that there was something wrong with the vaccine or whatever. The results were absolutely impeccable, and we have already seen that. In fact, I would like to say one thing, that if you really look at the present wave, the success for India is actually embedded in science, because what we have really been able to achieve is the administration that has actually happened for the vaccine. This is very important here again. That was the NEGVAC structure and governance mechanism, again an integrated approach. 19 key ministries were involved here. In fact, I had a chance of interacting with many people within the ministry, within various players who were here to really document this effort. But I must say that this was a ship which had a very strong rudder, but of course which was moving things in the right direction. But it would not have happened without that rudder. But I think it is just about that integrated effort that moved. So it is scientific approach to vaccine administration. Then of course the administration was the key. A lot of things would really be said in terms of like how this approach was set, again deeply embedded in science, as to how the beneficiaries were chosen, whether it should be the young people or the old people or the vulnerable people, or how it should happen. I think it was again something which was deeply looked at, conversion, talking to who, or talking to various players within the government of India to see who are the set of people who should be really looking at this. And then, of course, the administration started with the healthcare workers, which was exceedingly important, because if you really look at it, if we did not get this right, things could have actually been very different. But this is something that we really did get right. And then as we moved ahead, it moved to Ministry of Defense, to where
राष्ट्रवादी काँग्रेस के अल्पसंख्याक
थोड़ा आगे लो ना यार,
थोड़ा आगे लो, थोड़ा आगे।
सुबह से हम लोग इधर खड़े,
थोड़ा आगे लो।
खाली है ना,
मेगा अरे पुढे पुढे
आगे लो, आगे लो। लड़ेंगे,
अभी किधर लेके जा रहे? अभी कहाँ ले जा रहे? सेशन कोर्ट। लेकिन डरेंगे नहीं, जीतेंगे लड़ेंगे और जीतेंगे, लड़ेंगे और जीतेंगे।
राष्ट्रवादी काँग्रेस के अल्पसंख्याक
थोड़ा आगे लो ना यार,
थोड़ा आगे लो, थोड़ा आगे।
सुबह से हम लोग इधर खड़े,
थोड़ा आगे लो।